This
see
conference will now be recorded.
Thank you, Lisa. So the conference is being recorded. FREP will share this out through our webpage and possibly through the 7 Generations Ahead webpage as well. But thank you all for joining us for our May program that FREP would normally be doing in person, but given our situation with the pandemic, we're offering it this way through a webinar. I'm sure that more folks will join us as we go. We just ask that you leave yourselves muted and turn off your video cam to cut down on the interference with our program and what our presenters are trying to do. We will have opportunities to ask questions, but we ask that you type them into the chat box and I will relay them to our presenters so that all can hear the questions and give them an opportunity to respond. We will have 4 presenters throughout the course of the program today. And so be patient as we kind of work through those transitions. But I thank you all for joining us on behalf of the Fox River Ecosystem Partnership and 7 Generations Ahead, who we've worked very closely with on a number of things. Our program today will be led by Gary Cuneen, who is the Executive Director of 7 Generations Ahead. And he had the privilege of attending the Climate Change Summit in Madrid back in 2019, along with a school teacher and a student that he took with him as part of a special program they have that I'll let him tell you about. And then towards the end of today's program, Sarah Vasca will also speak. She also attended the program, and for those that were at our program earlier this year on shoreline management, she was one of our panelists for that. She's been working locally, but is also affiliated with some climate change groups that has been participating in these summits. So with that as a brief introduction, I will turn it over to Gary and let him take it away.
Great, thank you, Jeff, and thanks to the Fox River Ecosystem Partnership for your work. As Jeff said, 7 Generations Ahead, and our partners connected to the Fox Valley Sustainability Network have had the opportunity to work with FREP for a good stretch now, and we really enjoyed the collaboration and appreciate the good work that you're doing to help to take care of the Fox River and the ecosystem that it's a part of. Really excited to be doing this. This is going to be, I was saying to Jeff earlier, I am moderately good at technology, so this is going to be an interesting ride, but I think it's going to work out really well. As Jeff mentioned, we had the opportunity to be a part of the UN Climate Summit in Madrid. I'm going to basically kind of walk through a little bit about 7 Generations Ahead and It's Our Future Youth Sustainability Leadership Program, which was the impetus for going to Madrid. And then kind of part of the goal here is to just kind of give you a flavor and a feel for what the summit was like and who some of the players were, and just give you a sense of the atmosphere. And then secondly, to really dive into much later in the presentation, a lot of the key issues actually that were surrounding the summit, what was intended to be achieved, what were some of the sticking points, and to kind of put the summit within a broader understanding of what's happening globally with respect to the climate crisis. We'll talk a little bit about, or a lot about the actual summit activities. As Jeff said, you'll have a chance to hear from both Roz Beal, who is an Oak Park River Forest High School senior who's just graduated, who was our youth representative from the It's Our Future program, and then happens to be her mother, Laura Stamp, who is a middle school teacher, runs an eco club at the Brooks Middle School in Oak Park, and also is an advisory member of the It's Our Future program, and then later Sarah Vasca from Care for Climate. So with that being said, a little bit about 7 Generations Ahead. And let's see if I can get my screen to work here. We were founded in 2001, really based on the Native American principle that we have to consider in every decision that we make, the impact that it's going to have on the 7th generation. So thinking long term, thinking about caring for the planet. We have done a lot of work in a lot of, probably across every single sustainability topic area that exists through our sustainability planning with communities. But we do some deep dives in community solar. We're doing a lot of work in sort of market linking and helping institutions and municipalities to either source solar energy or to look at on-site installations, to acquire resources toward developing net zero energy facilities. We also do a lot of work. We've had a farm to school program since 2004, and that's a big part of our work. Zero waste, composting, and our youth leadership program. And as I mentioned, we, with the Fox Valley Sustainability Network, we've played a role in helping to seed multiple coalitions and networks across the state and across the region. And we use those networks as vehicles to do strategic planning, advocacy, and education around multiple sustainability topic areas. So these are some of our programs. You see the Fox Valley Sustainability Network, our Zero Waste Schools Initiative. We run the Illinois Farm to School Network and have a couple programs for local sustainable food sourcing, both the Illinois Harvest of the Month and the Great Lakes Great Apple Crunch. Our Planet Green initiative is a 2-community sustainability plan implementation project in Oak Park and River Forest. For those of you interested in composting, the Illinois Food Scrap Coalition is an initiative that we helped to launch with multiple partners about 3.5 years ago. You'll hear more about It's Our Future. And Greentown is a conference model that we've implemented in 21 times in 4 different Midwest states, working with mayors, municipalities, community sector, and private sector leaders. So with that being said, the It's Our Future program is something that we developed back in really over 2018, 2019. The Oak Park River Forest Community Foundation has a program called the Big Idea Challenge, and they invite projects to submit their proposals, and then they set up kind of a Shark Tank scenario and invite a couple hundred people to actually witness the presentations about the different projects. So we made, after 35 applications, we were selected as one of the top 5 and had the opportunity to present with 4 other organizations, and we were selected to win a $50,000 grant to essentially jumpstart the It's Our Future program. And a former Oak Park River Forest High School student, Abby Banks, co-presented with me, and it was an exciting night. Essentially, what we're trying to do with the program is to educate our youth about the climate crisis, and in doing that, also build upon the communication skills that they already have. Many of them have more skills than we do in relationship to social media, of course, but really looking at skill development in the areas of editorial writing, podcast development, radio show production, and also making presentations to community institution boards. Advocacy is a big part of it. Some of our youth have been advocating lately for the conversion of our opt-out residential curbside composting program to make it mandatory for all residents, and they're doing other advocacy as part of the program. We have youth that are on the One Earth Film Festival's Advisory Council, and we try to basically engage them in implementing projects on a local level that reflect some of the global environmental issues that we're all facing. Which leads us to the second to the last point, is that we also have attempted to engage them with other youth movements and leaders across the globe and across our country. Many of them have already been involved in the youth climate strikes, but we've done forums with the Climate Reality Project, and then, you know, as is the case that we're talking about today, we were able to send last year one student to the UN Climate Summit COP25 in Madrid. So that's the gist of the program. Let's talk about the summit a little bit. So the big theme of the summit was that it's a time for action, and you know, there's been so much talk about climate change and the need for action. The Paris Agreement was a very incredibly important step forward for the world, but the follow through on those commitments is really what people are looking to see happen. So there was big hope around this particular summit as being that summit that would spur on action and really move forward some of the key tenets within the Paris Agreement. We'll talk a little bit later about whether or not that was achieved. The summit opened with the Secretary General of the United Nations, Antonio Guterres from Portugal, who really set the tone. He was extremely hopeful. He said, you know, we can't have despair. Certainly the situation is dire, but we have to live off of hope. But he also posed the question, do we really want to be remembered as a generation that buried its head in the sand, that fiddled while the planet burned? So a very inspirational lead to the actual summit, and so it got started. It was December 2nd through the 13th. We were able to spend actually a little over a week there, and so as you can see, it is a major undertaking. 29,000 official country delegates and observer organizations and advocacy groups participated, government officials, heads of states, a lot of scientists, and people that are in some way involved in working on the climate crisis. 200 countries. This was, as some of you may know, was originally scheduled to be held in Santiago, Chile. However, there was a 1 million person march some months before the summit, dealing with issues of poverty and lack of resources and injustice, and there were people that were actually killed as a result of the march. And so the president of Chile at that point decided to cancel their doing the summit in Santiago, and then the president of Spain very quickly said that they would take it on, and so it ended up being in Madrid. The other thing we'll talk a little bit later, which happened on the Friday of the first week, was this incredible 500,000 person climate march in the center of Madrid that Greta Thunberg actually spoke at. So that kind of sets the table a little bit for the summit. You know, as you can imagine, with any big event, there's a lot of pomp and circumstance and organizations and folks that are kind of drawn to demonstrate their commitments here. This is the one picture on the left is a fellow in the metro station who was handing out brochures advocating for the reduction of greenhouse gases. This is I think the most hilarious picture that I took was a guy that was Sustain a Claus. And I think Roz might have a story about him later, but in any case, he had quite the get up and drew a lot of attention. There were also other organizations that were outside that were setting up tables and advocating for various causes in relationship to solving the climate crisis. As you walked from the metro stations through the main corridor to get to the venue, there were these signs that really kind of brought home this important point, is that this really isn't about climate change. This is a crisis. It's an emergency. And so you see some of these signs in relationship to the Sahara Desert increasing its size by 10%, and over 17 million people leaving their homes as a result of the climate crisis. The sixth great extinction of species, the percentage of which the Antarctic ice shelves are melting. And then trying to bring it home to the U.S. and also locally, in this case, to the country of Spain, the reality that many cities, including Miami, stand a great chance of going under, essentially, with the rise of the sea levels, and Spain risks desertification as a result. 143 million people stand to become climate refugees or migrants by 2050. And the fact that our global surface temperatures are increasing at such an alarming rate, and have already increased by 1 degree Celsius, warrants this being called not climate change, but an emergency. So that kind of set the stage. As we walked into the actual venue, there were two zones. One was the green zone, where you could get a pass. You just had to sign up in advance. 7 generations ahead had actually made an application to be an observer organization in 2019 to get into the blue zone, but you can only get access for the following year when you make an application in the previous year. So in any case, in the green zone, there were lots of displays, and you'll see some of those in the pictures shortly, but and sessions on all kinds of topics, some high-level topics around countries' efforts to and plans to reduce their emissions to zero, to particular sessions on plastics or on the impact on marine life that the climate crisis is happening. And in the blue zone was where all the country delegates were meeting, and the observer organizations, and eventually where Ross Beal was able to enter to be on a youth panel, and you'll hear about that whole story shortly. We were playing, in addition to exposing our one youth delegate to the event, we were playing the role also of trying to communicate back to our constituents in the Chicago metro area what was actually happening there. So we kind of acted like street reporters and did tons of videos and interviews, and sent back pictures, and then posted daily reports on what we were learning by speaking with the different government officials and NGO reps. NGO means non-governmental organizations, and then we just made all those postings and emails. So before I go into a little bit more about some of the actual interviews, I don't know if Lisa, if you want to unmute yourself for a second and just kind of give us a couple minutes of what it was like to receive all of these texts and emails and video clips and pictures, etc., and what you were doing on this end.
Yeah, so basically before Gary left, we had planned that we would communicate mostly through the WhatsApp application on our phones, just because we knew that was an application that would work both in Europe and here in the United States. And we had a lovely plan set up before he left about how many emails and how many posts we were going to do, which quickly went out the window. Because of the time change, my colleague Amy Bartucci and I would wake up in the morning and have like 30, 40 texts from Gary pictures, videos, commentary, names. Each evening he would send an email with an update. And so our task was then to basically download all the information, all these pictures, all these videos, try to get them into some sort of organized manner out onto our social media. So downloading them off of WhatsApp, emailing them to ourselves, reviewing all of it. Initially, we tried to create narratives or stories, but soon it just became clear that there was just so much to share that it was more just about how can we get as much out there as possible. So we kind of divided and conquered, reviewed all the pictures, the videos, and did some editing and kind of chose what we thought would be best in what venue. So we had Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and almost a daily email that went out. And then in the end, we had so much material that we felt like we needed to leave out there for people who are interested, that we created a folder in the Google Drive that's actually still able to be linked to from our website under the It's Our Future tab, and all of the videos, pictures, and text that Gary sent back is still living there. It's all available still.
Great, thank you.
Sure.
Yes, and it was quite an amount of work on this end, but somehow we made it work, and I think we were able to communicate back in a lot of information, and almost kind of give people a sense of being part of an online journey, if you will, at the summit. You know, so a couple highlights, and then after I run through some of these, we'll pitch to Laura, and then we'll pitch to Roz. But you know, one of the clear themes as we were talking with these representatives, particularly representatives of countries from Africa and from Asia and from South America that were poorer countries, less developed nations, but the lowest emitting of greenhouse gas nations. These nations were making the points that, you know, we're not creating the greenhouse gases, yet we're actually being impacted the most by climate change, whether it's in relationship to sea level rise or extreme weather events or drought or disease. All of these things were impacting these nations, and their position going into the summit essentially was, you know, we believe that the high emitting countries need to take responsibility and to provide funds for them to be able to adapt to what's happening in their nations as a result of the climate crisis. We also heard from NGOs that were in the actual Amazon, from Borneo, from Ecuador, from Peru, that were making the point of how important the rainforests are, and how much exploitation is still happening in those areas by large companies, but also how local indigenous people have been allowed to essentially go in and cut down forests, and what are the options for people that need to survive, basically, and how can the UN climate agreement create opportunities for local people to make a living but not destroy the rainforests. You'll hear in a little bit from one of the representatives of our Children's Trust, which has played a role in with youth in actually litigating and making lawsuits against states across the United States and our federal government, making the case that they have not done their part to deal with the climate crisis. We were, you know, I mentioned Turkey just for an example, you know, and just when I met this delegation, we could not actually speak because we didn't speak each other's language, but they were there. We were attempting to communicate, and they were all laughing and taking selfies, and it was almost like they were at a sporting event, which was an interesting thing for me to witness, and not from a judgmental standpoint, but from the standpoint of, you know, you have human beings that are a part of this, and whether they're government officials or part of nonprofits or scientists. I mean, everybody's coming at it from a different perspective, and they were thrilled to be there. And my only hope was that, you know, that they and the other countries were going to be taking this seriously. But there's kind of it was just an interesting, it was almost felt like at some sort of a sporting event or something. And then we hear from Tibet. You'll hear one of the speakers later just talk about their exile and some of the issues that they were facing with China. The man on the right, Willie Lucy, I actually met in the green zone, and just went up to him and introduced myself, and he turned out to be a dignitary of the Kingdom of Tonga, one of the sort of nations that is being threatened, of course, with the rising sea level. And we started to have this long conversation, and then he started to tell me that he was speaking over at the Blue Zone, and then he said yes, and he told me some of the things that he had written on the topic, and then he said, yeah, I was just talking with Nancy Pelosi, and he starts pulling out pictures of him with Nancy Pelosi, who had brought a delegation of Congress representatives to the summit. We did not have any, of course, any official U.S. Federal government representatives from the executive branch or from staff. But he turns out that he is one of the most beloved of the representatives, and he just exuded love and hope and positive. And his main point was that this is a human issue, and we need to figure out a way to be able to be in good relationship with one another, and to come together to solve this climate crisis. And he was just a beacon of hope and love. And so I threw his picture in there, and he and I are still communicating back and forth. And lastly, you'll see some of the Chilean youth art in a little bit here, but with Japan, had a really striking conversation with some of the government delegation there, who they were asking my opinion on the Article 6, which is the international carbon trade, and I was asking them about their commitments, and they were saying, you know, this is really hard because we have strong economic realities. We want to make these strong commitments toward the climate, but we also don't want to sacrifice our country's ability to survive and thrive economically. And that kind of conversation brought to the forefront for me, you know, it's just some of the key tensions with getting, you know, 200 countries with all kinds of different interests to agree on a set of goal targets that ultimately we all need to agree on and achieve if we're going to stave off the worst impacts of increasing global surface temperatures. So with that, those were just some of my initial impressions. I do want to pitch now to Laura, if we could unmute Laura Stamp. As I mentioned, Laura's on the advisory committee for It's Our Future. She's also a middle school teacher at Brooks Middle School in Oak Park, and runs an eco club there. Laura, what were some of your takeaways and impressions, some of your most interesting conversations?
Hi. Well, so when we were there, I guess the thing that was most exciting about being there was the opportunity to talk to people from all over the world. It was very nerve-wracking at first because we were literally, that was our only assignment. We didn't know if we could get into the building. We didn't know if we could what exactly the things that we were going to do. So our opportunity to talk to people from all over the world, we made a point of engaging with younger people and asking them about their impressions and why they were there. So I think Roz can really talk about that. I was really there to support Roz in her her interviews with people too. So I went around and talked to a lot of people, and the themes that we understood from everyone, the themes of we got to get going, we need more help, this is a humongous issue that the Americans are ignoring, and we just need to get action. And I was so impressed with visiting with people from the smallest countries and their passion and their determination to make a difference. So that was my biggest impression. I would like to pass this over to Roz because I think she has a much better story than I do about how she got involved in the speaker panel and everything, if that's okay.
Perfect.
Okay.
Okay, yeah. So my mom was super helpful for getting me to talk to people because it was actually the most scary thing in the world. But because I had never done that before, like there were all these people from different countries, so it was really, really nerve-wracking. But then my mom said, just go up to people who look like you. So people who like had my same style and were like my age. And so the second day when I was going up to youth, I went up to these group of kids who were activists from the UK, Belgium, and somewhere in Scandinavia, I don't really remember where. And they were so passionate, so awesome, and like so inspiring. I was like, wow, these people are so cool. So I met them, and then my mom and I decided to email people in the blue zone, as Gary said, and be like and get them outside the blue zone and ask them for an interview or something. So I just emailed a bunch of people, and then a guy.
Well, she sat and she worked on her homework and then sent out these emails at the same time. Like we're sitting in our Airbnb in Madrid, just going through the official list of participants at the conference and saying, well, maybe that person will respond to an email. Maybe that person will respond. We sent probably like 25.
Yeah, well,
emails.
I'm doing my AP European History homework, learning about Spain like 20 years ago. So anyway, it was a lot. And then the next day at like noon, I got a response back from this guy, and he's like, yep, so you're going to be on this panel. I got you an official pass to the Blue Zone. Just like come whenever you're ready. Like you need a guardian since you're a minor, but like, yeah, come in and you're on this panel. And I was like, what? Like I was like on the metro, like shaking. I was like, I'm on a panel at the UN climate conference. Like, how did this happen? What's going on? Like, I don't understand anything. And so it was really crazy. And I figured out I had to do a speech on intergenerational climate action, which was also kind of like, I was like, what? So it was really crazy. And it actually, when we get to the like checking and everything, I had to go alone. And yesterday, from talking to those youth activists, there was a boy who was speaking on the panel with me who I interviewed yesterday. So I knew him, his name's Elijah. He started the strikes, the climate strikes in the UK. So he was essentially like my buddy for the next 2 days.
Well, even more to the point, like she got the pass to go into the Blue Zone. So she and I go to the counter to go through security, and they say to her, okay, well, you have a pass, but sorry, your mom does not have a pass. And I'm like, well, I have a passport. Look, I can come in, can't I? And they said, no, you can't come in. You're not secure for security. And Roz can't go in on alone. And so then we looked down the counter, and there was this boy, Elijah, with his chaperone. And she said, oh yeah, I'll be your chaperone. That's fine. So this random woman from Belgium invited us or allowed Roz to get into the Blue Zone and be on the panel. I mean, if it was so fortuitous that they were there at that time, otherwise Roz wouldn't have gotten to do this.
It was a very it was just crazy that it got to happen. And then so Elijah is a super amazing youth activist. He's 15. He hasn't gone to school for like 6 months because he's been traveling around all of the country. He went to the Amazon and met a girl and did projects in the Amazon about climate action, travels all over Europe and goes to local climate strikes there with other Friday for Future activists. And it was just I was blown away because I didn't know there were people like that. He was just so passionate and did everything he could 24/7. And so he was super inspiring to just walk around and talk with. He was so nice too. So then the time comes and I speak on the panel, and I'm just in awe because the people on the panel are literally insane. It's a person who started a nonprofit for economists and scientists to be on the same level and talk about
an 18-year-old.
An 18-year-old to talk about climate action. And then they got 2 people who started the strikes in their own countries, a girl who started the strikes in Switzerland, and then me, and I'm just I'm from America, hi, because I was the only American on the panel. So it was just really an amazing opportunity for me, and I just met so many amazing people, and I just came home so inspired to just literally make any action. And I now have all these connections and know all these people, and I see what they're doing, and I start to make my own action because of it, and go out and get these ideas from them. So it was just really such an amazing opportunity for me. And then I also think from talking to them and just seeing what their perspectives are, the whole COP25 is one big joke, kind of, because it's oh my gosh, this climate change is this huge problem, and then in reality nothing's going on. There's no change. Industries are winning. The COP25 is funded by oil companies a lot, by Shell. Are you kidding me? What is going on? So it was really interesting to hear their perspectives and actually learn about the corruption in trying to fix climate change. So it was really interesting just seeing that perspective and learning so much more about it.
She also got to spend, her Blue Zone pass was good, so she got to spend another whole day where Gary and I were out in the outside interviewing people and talking to people in the green zone. So that's another reason why it was really inspiring for her, is because she got to spend a whole nother day with these youth activists.
Mm-hmm.
And again, we didn't meet any other American youth activists. We met some Americans who were there doing research,
mm-hmm.
but not this activist. And from, the inspiration, Roz has taken a lot of that energy with It's Our Future. And they have done some really great things since she's been back. I think it's really galvanized her. And she's even, she's just more confident in her voice.
Yeah.
Even though that experience was really nerve-wracking for her to be told at 10 in the morning that you're going to be on a panel, and then on a panel in front of a worldwide audience at 1 o'clock in the afternoon. It was crazy. It was such a whirlwind of emotions, and she really stepped up, but it's really made her so much more confident about being an advocate here too.
Literally yesterday, this is the weirdest thing. I don't know what was coming over me, but I just wanted to do a political protest, which I would never have done if it wasn't for COP25 and meeting all those activists. I just put some signs out, climate change signs out, and then I danced in front of them on Lake Street in Keystone, and then just had cars pass by me, and I was just dancing to Imagine by the Beatles with these protest signs, and telling people about things that they could do to combat the climate crisis. What was that confidence? So that confidence definitely came from the COP25 and meeting all those people. So yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Raj. You were a star, and Laura, your support was awesome, and I'm glad that you were able to really benefit from that whole experience and build your confidence and help our communities here in the metro area address this issue. We're going to turn it now to listen to a couple of the voices, a few 2-minute video clips on some of the people that we connected with. So hopefully all of this is going to work. But we have a Jamaican woman with an NGO really addressing the the issue that I was talking about a little bit before in terms of poorer countries, having to bear the brunt of the impacts of climate change, and while they're not necessarily, causing it through their greenhouse gas emissions. This was working before when I did this, and for some reason right now the video is not popping up. So let me just give this one more try, and then if it doesn't work, we'll just move on from here. Okay. Well, let me. There was another fellow I had. As I mentioned, we were talking to representatives from countries, and this is just a handful of them, but from Guatemala, Brazil, Nepal, Mali, Bangladesh, Kenya, South Korea, Chile, Gambia, Turkey, the Dominican Republic, Burkina Faso, and many others. That their constant point is that they were really the ones that were, again, bearing so much of the burden of the climate change and climate crisis. And one of the points that they made was that, and this is something that was built into the Paris Agreement, was that there needed to be a green climate fund, essentially, that would help to support those countries that were adapting to the climate crisis, essentially. We talked to folks that were literally island nations off the coast of Panama that were starting to send people off the island and find places for them to live mainland because their islands were going underwater. And so it was very visceral, it was very real for them, and some of that was captured. But for whatever reason, my video is now not working, so I'm just going to continue here with the presentation, and if I can get it to work a little bit later, we'll do that. And I mentioned the other person, Holly Frank from our Children's Trust. This is a 17-year-old Native American woman who was part of a lawsuit against the state of Florida, and they were not suing the state for money. What they wanted as part of their lawsuit was for the state of Florida to actually create a climate action plan. And their whole case was predicated on the notion that the state was failing their children by not addressing the climate crisis in a real and comprehensive way through development and implementation of a plan. And this particular organization, if you research it, our Children's Trust, has developed these lawsuits across the U.S. So it was fascinating to talk to one of the reps there that was actually part of the litigation against the state of Florida. Moving forward, this is the cafe where Roz and Laura and I were discussing, and Roz was preparing her presentation on the panel. This is the actual panel that the youth panel that Roz participated in, and as Roz just shared, it was quite an exciting moment for her. So in the green zone, these are just some pictures just to give you a sense of what it was like. Lots of sessions in the upper right corner there. You see sessions that were being led by youth around a variety of topics. I think this one was on plastics, and it was really wonderful from my perspective to see youth so involved, and having prepared these sessions and led them and implemented them at the Green Zone at the summit. So that was really inspiring. Other sessions again that were led on all kinds of different topics. And then we just kind of met people randomly. These Tibetan monks used to be part of they were elected officials within the government. They were exiled, and they had firsthand knowledge and of a lot of the mineral extraction that was going on within China, a lot of the pollution, of course, and despite some of China's advances in solar and in electric vehicles, they were making the claim that there's still lots of fossil fuel development and mineral extraction and other things going on that were really doing harm to the natural environment there. One of the fascinating interviews we were able to conduct was with Jose Ignacio Galan, who's the CEO of Iberdrola. Iberdrola has 34,000 employees across the world. They are the largest producer of wind power in the world, and they're playing a large role in solar as well. And so we were able to get the interview. And again, all of these interviews are on the 7 Generations Ahead website under the SR Future program. But his main point was that, we've got to have metrics. We've got to be able to measure progress, and that was a key, one of the key themes within the entire summit is how are we going to be able to verify, and what are the mechanisms for measuring and verifying the actual greenhouse gas emissions reductions. So in any case, I'm not going to try to do the video again. We'll have to work this out for another time. But I was really taken by this this painting. 2030 is now. The reality is, according to the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, that over the next 10 years, starting this year in 2020, that globally we have to reduce our emissions 7.6% annually. And over the last decade, our emissions on average globally have risen by 1.5%. So we need to peak that out and then begin moving toward decline. And 2030 is literally a decade away. And I thought this particular painting graphic captured that very, very well. There's a picture of Lauren and her daughter Roz at one of the paintings and graphics around plastics in the green zone. That was one of the sessions I believe that the youth did that day. I had a chance to learn about Chile's plan. They have a super comprehensive plan to phase out coal, and they have a little more control over the utilities there, but their coal phase out plan is articulated. This particular session walked through the different stages of coal phase out, where they were at currently, and when they plan to be done with it. And it's a pretty clear roadmap forward that they've developed. The hope is, of course, is that all countries have a coal or fossil fuel phase out plan, and that they're working on emitting, net zero emissions essentially by 2050 is what the scientists are recommending. to avoid a 1.5 to 2 degree increase in Celsius global temperature. So I think there's Laura and Roz with a couple of the youth delegates. I'm not sure what organization they were from, but and then, you know, one of the most touching parts here, before we get into some of the technical aspects of the summit, were that a group of students, ages 8 to 12-year-olds, created these paintings, which are absolutely stunning, and really expressing their concerns over the climate crisis. So just take a moment to look at some of these. Why are you doing this to me? Impressive. So again, these are just some shots of some of the country delegates and NGO reps that we were able to talk with. We probably collectively talked to, I don't know, roughly 50 or so different countries during the course of our time. Might have been a little higher. But again, as Laura was saying, it was just an incredible experience to get everybody's perspectives on this. And then that Friday night, so December 2, 3, 4, 5, December 6th, there was again a 500,000 person march that culminated in a talk by Greta Thunberg. It was just amazing. It was, you know, part of it was right by the Prado Museum in downtown Madrid. Prior to that, there was actually a press conference that Greta was doing before she was walking with an entourage over to the march. Young woman on the right is from Norway, and she and I were talking prior to the press conference, waiting for Greta to come, and then we kind of followed the entourage and have, again, on the SGA website, some video of some of that. She was promoting a festival that she was doing in her country, but there were just throngs and throngs of people, and got a chance to get close to Greta a small handful of times, and as you could imagine, she was not that comfortable with the whole scenario. It was just a lot of people, although, you know, everybody was supportive. It's just throngs of people with you know, shouting support, and just you know, quite intimidating for anybody, actually. Having given you some flavor of the experience of the summit, let's talk a little bit about where we're at realistically here. You can see that you know, the top 20 emitters include China, US. They group the European Union together, although they also include specific countries within that top 20, Germany and the UK, but as individual countries as well. And then, you know, you've got a bunch of groupings of countries. If I can broadly group them, I would say that you've got your you know, rich countries, the most developed nations that are producing the most emissions, that are creating the most havoc. You've got other countries that are creating high emissions, but they would like to, but they're poorer countries, and they're developing, you know, the Indias and and China's and Brazil's and a few others that are essentially saying to the United States, European Union, and other more developed, wealthy countries, you had your turn. You know, you developed, you built your economies. We would like the same opportunity to do that. So some of these nations, like China and India and Russia and Brazil, are actually balking against making some of the more stringent commitments in accordance with the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change recommendations, which was an interesting dynamic. And then you have many countries not on this list that were the ones I mentioned before, that were poorer countries, that were low greenhouse gas emitting countries, that were really being impacted the greatest. So just a lot of different interests there. You can see, you know, the graphic before was the top emitters. This has per capita on it on the right. You see that USA, Russia, Japan, China, European Union are all above the global average of per capita basis there. So a couple of facts. The top 20 produce 75% of all greenhouse gases. I already mentioned the 1.5% increase over the past decade. Paris was designed to keep temperatures at, you know, from rising above 1.5 to 2 degrees Celsius, and that agreement was scheduled to take effect January 1 of this year. So there, you know, there has been some movement. That European Union has a commitment to net zero emissions by 2050. 67 countries and 8 US states have net zero commitments. Some of the leaders are Finland, Denmark, and Sweden. Suriname and Bhutan are the only countries that are carbon negative. And so it just gives you a little bit of flavor of what we're dealing with. You know, in terms of the goals of and results of COP25, essentially they were trying to get agreement on increasing the emissions reductions commitments based on the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change recommendations, and that did not happen. Secondly, this was supposed to be the summit where they were going to iron out Article 6, which is the international carbon market, all of the governing rules for that, and now that's been kicked down the road to COP26 in Glasgow, but COP26 in Glasgow, because of the coronavirus, has now been canceled. And so they're looking to reschedule that in 2021. So these were the two major disappointments and results from this past summit. But let's talk about a little bit about the international carbon market, just some of the key, just what it is, some of the key issues, and then we'll close up here. First of all, the idea is that countries that meet and then exceed their emissions reduction targets through greenhouse gas emission projects and strategies can actually sell, you know, the credits, you know, past the goal that they needed to meet. So if they had extra emissions reductions, they could sell credits to countries that haven't met their targets, and this would enable those countries with more emissions to use credits to help them meet their goal targets. So it's basically putting a dollar value on these carbon credits. It's, in theory, would reduce the price of reaching greenhouse gas emission reduction goals, and also incent the private sector to create projects that they could then sell and generate greater emissions reductions. As I mentioned, the Paris Agreement was supposed to set the rules. The rules haven't been set. COP25 was supposed to set the rules haven't been set. Even when they are set, Article 6 is not legally binding. At this point, there are no fines, no sanctions that are tied to Article 6. And in general, the overall Paris Agreement is a international cooperation treaty. It's not a legally binding. Nobody's going to get fined or sanctioned if they don't meet the goal target. So that's what we're dealing with here, essentially. Some of the key sticking points, this one I like to call additionality, meaning that, what they're arguing is that any credits for emissions reductions ought to be from new projects that are developed, not from projects that were created, some even dating back to 2012. So countries like Brazil, China, India want to take credits for things that were done previously. The argument is if that's allowed, how far back can you go? And then you're basically lowering the value of credits and undermining the emissions reduction that actually needs to happen to be able to meet the goals. Other issues with double counting. So if you're a country like Brazil, for example, that might take on a project that preserves a certain acreage of rainforest, who gets that credit? Does Brazil get it for doing it, or does the country that they sell the credits to get that credit? Well, you can't double count that, because otherwise it throws off your overall emissions reduction targets. You can't, have both countries count that. So double counting was a big issue. And then thirdly, just making sure that this overall international carbon market doesn't become a way for the highest emitting greenhouse gas countries to find loopholes to avoid doing their own emissions reductions, but simply, have them buy credits, but not deal with their own emissions. And that's the biggest thing. And then the last I mentioned earlier was just how, from the CEO of Iberdrola, how do you track, how do you verify all of this? Specifically with respect to rainforests, some of the issues that were raised and discussed were how will these emissions reductions be verified? Will the projects that are developed and implemented have strict guidelines so that there aren't human rights abuses of indigenous peoples? What happens when political leaders like the current president of Brazil, they come in and wipe out emissions reductions by allowing massive deforestation? How does that get counted? And then should it count when reforestation projects end up being short-term profit makers? So you create a bunch of trees, but then they end up being cut down in the short term for profit, like palm trees, for palm tree oil. So a lot of technical issues to resolve with this, and suffice to say that COP25, did not achieve what it set out to achieve. As I mentioned earlier, many of the poor countries that with low emissions want that green climate fund to provide more money for projects in their countries that will help them to adapt to climate crisis and do more conservation projects. Right now, that fund is in the area of, I believe it's 10 billion, which is extremely small compared to what most analysts say would be needed to help countries that are adapting. And then I've already raised this question of, sort of the developing versus developed nations argument, and even countries like China and Brazil, India, South Africa, saying that they don't want to bear the burden of increased greenhouse gas emissions reductions when the wealthier nations should be doing that. Lastly, it's just interesting that, with all that's happened in Australia, Prime Minister Morrison was under fire for not addressing the climate crisis. And just in the face of the incredible bushfires that we all witnessed during that time, and that will continue to happen there. And mentioned that Nancy Pelosi, in spite of our current president's withdrawal from the UN Climate Summit, brought in a congressional delegation to send the message, hey, we're still here, we're still in, we're committed, and we'll work around our current federal government to to make sure that we're addressing the issue of the climate crisis in the U.S. There's a picture of Nancy at the summit, and with that, I want to recommend a book in closing by Christiana Figueres, who's one of the architects of the Paris Agreement, along with Tom Rivett-Carnac, and really was instrumental in making the Paris Agreement happen. She's also the daughter of the Costa Rican president that took and his Congress took money out of the military, decided to no longer fund military, and put that money toward education and other things to benefit the people of Costa Rica. She said in one part of the book, address the issue of optimism, and I'm just going to leave or stop on this note before we get some insights from Sarah. But she said that Václav Havel described optimism as a state of mind, not a state of the world. Three characteristics are generally agreed upon as essential to making this mindset be transformative. Number one, the intention to see beyond the immediate horizon. Number two, the comfort with uncertainty about the final outcome. And thirdly, the commitment that is fostered by that mindset. So in the face of what I would consider to be some really dire and negative news, not only about what's happening with the climate crisis, but the current failure of the climate summits to significantly move forward on this issue. I think we all need to find a way to develop that mindset that that this can happen. It may not be happening right now, but we really don't have another choice. And with that, I'll turn it over to Sarah. Sarah, you've been involved with Care for Climate. If you want to just say a few words about your experience, and I know you've been to a few of these UN climate summits in the past, and just some of your impressions on participating.
Yes, thank you, Gary. So my name is Sarah Vasquez. Let me see if I can turn on my camera too. And I work as the director of Climate Academy at Care About Climate, which is a youth-centric nonprofit that's based in the U.S. but works internationally to educate, empower, and unite international community of young climate activists to create change in their local communities. This was my third, COP25 was my third time attending COP. I attended COP22, which was in the wake of the Paris Agreement signing, that first time when countries reconvened to talk about how do we actually implement this agreement. And then the following year in COP23, I attended in Bonn, Germany. I also work for a company called Bluestem Ecological Services, where we work to build, restore, and maintain natural ecosystems. So I'm actually looking out over our green roof at our corporate headquarters. It was a little windy outside for me to sit out there and talk though today. So a little bit about my experience at COP. I was able to be in that blue zone, which was the area that Roz was able to go into for that last 2 days. The exclusivity of this whole conference means that there's tiers. So there's people who can, general public are welcome to go into the green zone. The blue zone is for accredited individuals who have their organization at least has been vetted over the course of a year to be allowed access to it, as well as, of course, the parties, the government agencies, the countries of the world who send an official delegation. I got really lucky this year, and through some contacts, I was able to get a badge from the Chilean government, which was the president of the COP. They were kind of running the show, and so that gave me kind of an all-access pass to the proceedings, which was really neat. Haven't had that before. And what that meant was that I was able to sit in on some of the closed meetings that were going on between party negotiators during the conference. One of which was talking specifically about ACE, which stands for Action for Climate Empowerment. And so Action for Climate Empowerment is Article 12 of the Paris Agreement, and it was one of the founding pieces of the United Nations Framework Convention of Climate Change, the group that convenes this conference every year. And it calls for a mechanism to include civil society engagement in the negotiations. So that means that the general public should have access to education on climate change, capacity building or trainings. There should be public awareness. So we should make the news of this event public. We should share it with everyone. Everyone should be aware of the implications of climate change in their communities. There's a clause for public access to information is important. We need to have transparency, as well as public participation in international cooperation. So this climate change isn't something that just affects those world leaders high up at the top. They're not the only ones who need to be participating in this process, but it's something that needs to be kind of brought down and spread and diffused throughout local communities and other networks, which is something that I love about both FREP and 7 Generations Ahead, in that they are doing exactly that. So in this closed meeting, what I kind of got about kind of the consensus of what's going on with Action for Climate Empowerment is that a number of countries, maybe about 30 to 40 countries, have nominated a focal point to address this issue of Action for Climate Empowerment on that public participation stakeholder engagement portion of the Paris Agreement. They're working to implement different tools like youth education and advocacy, stakeholder consultations and things like that will bring together all these different people who don't traditionally have access to spaces like COP. One of the main problems that they said was that there isn't enough funding for these education initiatives, and many policymakers are trying to keep people out and keep the control to themselves. So those are some things that will need to be worked on in coming years. I think what that means for us is that we need to be addressing that educational deficit when it comes to climate change, and have more stakeholder engagement so that there is participation up and down the political and economic ladder across the globe. Everyone should have access to participate in this. Some of the other things that I saw were a really ambitious push to raise country commitments. They're called nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement. So it was supposed to be done before COP26, which was supposed to be this November, but as Gary mentioned, that's being pushed back a whole year. And so we're really looking for countries to step up, and right now, especially the UN's calling for in people's coronavirus response to be pushing for something like a Green New Deal or a climate positive sort of response, where they are putting environmental issues and public health issues together into one solid plan for revitalizing the economy globally, really. One of the other things that I did during the conference, or really in the weeks preceding the conference, was I helped organize a conference of youth. And so each year for the past 15 years, the youth constituency, or the group of, I guess, nonprofits like Care About Climate, or I guess the It's Our Future branch of 7 Generations Ahead, will be working in this space to form a lobby where all the youth activists and all the youth voices can be heard as one and present those to the parties. And so for the past 15 years, they've convened a small 3-day conference in the days ahead of COP so that we can prepare ourselves, have some capacity building, share best practices, search for solutions, and work on some of those policy platforms that we'll be sharing during COP. So this year we had 400 youth that attended from 85 countries. We also had the big fun shift where we were planning a conference for about 10 months that was going to be in Chile, and then 3 weeks ahead of time had to move to Spain. So that cost me like 2 years off my life probably, but it was really great. And one of the primary outcomes was that we called on our government officials from around the world to increase ambition and implementation of the Paris Agreement, to support meaningful participation of youth, women, and Indigenous people, and provide adequate financial mechanisms to be able to do so. And in that, making sure that those financial flows are consistent with pathways to lowering greenhouse gas emissions. So going back to Roz's point about how much of the conference and much of the lobbying that's done at the conference is done by people who are supporting coal, natural gas, and oil production, we need to divest from that on a systemic level. Like the World Bank needs to be divesting from that. All these different economies need to be significantly pulling back subsidies and resources from those so that we can make this green transition. Kind of the final thing I want to point out was that the United States' role in this event was minimal. In past years, we've seen, under the Obama administration, we were able to show some leadership as the United States in bringing forth the Paris Agreement and getting that finally signed. It was a big initiative between Xi Jinping of China and President Obama to be able to bridge that and make that happen, because previous agreements through this convention had not been able to move forward because of tensions between the US and China. Specifically, the Kyoto Protocol didn't reach the level of support that it needed because of the US pulling out, and then China backed out, and then the two largest emitters were no longer participating, and it became kind of a moot point. So with the Paris Agreement, the Obama administration had a really strong involvement in UNFCCC and in COP to be able to do that. Now it's more diminished. And so under the current administration, we see a smaller delegation going from, up 100, 200 delegates to closer to about 20 to 50 delegates that the U.S. sends. They're mostly non-political staffers. You're not seeing political appointees. We're not seeing John Kerry or the current Secretary of State coming like we've seen in past years. And many of these staffers have been part of this since before Trump was elected. They're not necessarily tied to a political platform, and so they're just there to do their job, which makes it really hard when you want to yell at them that they don't necessarily believe what they're being told to pursue. But I think one of the main issues, and kind of I felt a sense of hope compared to past years, is that the U.S. delegation understands the necessity of U.S. leadership in climate action. We understand the economic implications of it. The only problem is we don't want to be the ones who have to bankroll it. And many of the countries, as Gary mentioned, are looking for the U.S. and other developed countries to make those economic levers available to less developed countries to be able to pay for climate change adaptation and mitigation. So thank you for letting me share, and thank you as well to Gary, Laura, and Roz for their amazing work at COP25.
Great, thank you, Sarah. With that, we're finished. Jeff, want to flip it back over to you to make any closing remarks, or if there are any questions, we're happy to answer.
Yeah, thank you, Gary, and thanks, Sarah and Roz and Laura, for your comments and all your great work there, and for taking the time to share it. I'm glad we were able to put this together today, and hopefully we'll be able to share it out via the recording so that other people who weren't able to join us today can also learn from it and get the lessons. I have not seen any questions pop up in the chat. If anyone has a question, now would be the time to type it in. I know we've gone almost to the full length of our time. And so I guess seeing no other questions coming up, I just would like to thank everyone for their participation. Hopefully it all gives you a lot of things to think about. I wrote down the name and information for this book so I can go out and find it. And I hope that you all will too. So thanks again to all our speakers, and thanks to everyone for joining us. And if other folks want to hear it later, let them know that we'll put it up on the FREP webpage as soon as we can. Thanks all.
Great, thank you.